All right, thanks for joining us. Stick around because we're going to show you how we're going to change this plate into that cube. Number one rule, don't do any full welds until it's all tacked together. Okay, we're ready for our final project. Let's go ahead and get some of our safety gear on and we'll be ready to go. We're going to be grinding with a hand grinder, so ear protection is suggested. And because of the sparks that we're going to have while we're grinding, wearing your welding cap is also strongly encouraged. Because we're going to be handling hot metal, your gloves, of course, right? When you're ready for your final project, you're going to be given a rectangle like this, and it will be divided into 6 squares. These squares should be fairly equal in length and really easy to then break apart. We are going to assemble these squares into a cube. The last weld we did was the open corner joint, and essentially this cube is made of nothing but open corner joints. To tack this together, I'm going to show you how to use a piece of scrap angle iron or a piece of scrap tube. One of the main things we need to realize that is TIG welding. We've talked about it being one of the cleanliest welding processes there is. It's actually very sensitive to contamination. And during the plasma arc cutting process, we have a lot of oxides on this edge right here. If we weld over that, it will cause lots of weld problems, such as porosity, which are bubbles in your weld. Also, the backside has a lot of dross. That dross can also create contamination. It also gets in the way of fit up. There's also some of these connecting spots on the squares that held them together. Best practice to make this ready to be welded, make sure there's no rust on the surface, it's all clean, and that every edge is also been ground clean. We're gonna go ahead and take a moment and grind all of these edges down. I want to show you what the dirty edge looks like versus the cleaned edge. Okay, you want to make sure that you get that nice and clean. None of that gray stuff. You want it shiny bright. All right, so I've got my 6 pieces cleaned up enough. All the edges are shiny bright, and front and back of those edges are also shiny bright. Eventually, you will want to maybe sand or polish the inside, but that's better suited for when we're closer to welding it all the way out versus while they're still flat pieces. Okay, it'll be a little bit easier when it's a cube. Now, this is going to go together much like the open corner joint, obviously, because that's what it is, but we're going to put 3 together at a time, and then we will try to massage this into place. And if anything, I might do 3 together, then 2 together, and then put my final piece on. We'll see how it goes. Again, we're gonna use spring clamps to hold things in place. You'll also wanna check for square by taking a few of your plates and turning them 90 degrees to each other. What you're trying to see is if you have any sides that are overlapping or hanging over more than others. And then if I rotate it and I look again down the edge, am I noticing a difference? Are any of these plates standing out being larger or smaller than the others? Because you'll have to compensate that for in some way. Trying to make a little bit of a gap here or maybe a little bit of an overlap here or there. And we might actually have one on that piece right there. So while you're grinding these, it might be best to rotate them once in a while to make sure things are turning out the way you want it. And again, you can use the table. Those are looking good both ways, but this piece right here does look large on that side. So I'm going to take my grinder and I'm going to come down a little bit with it. Again, we're gonna just flip these over and over again until we can see that all four sides are nice and square to each other, making sure there's not any high or low spots to them. All right, now that we have all of our squares pretty well taken care of, those look pretty good. I'm not holding them super awesome, but I think they will work out good. So this project seems easy, seems simple, just welding a cube together. But if you don't take these detail moments to really make sure that this is gonna fit together properly, it's not gonna weld together as good as you'd hoped. So if I was using a piece of scrap angle iron, and I'll have some of these floating around the shop, again, take our trusty spring clamp, and if anything, take it, overlap it just like that, and squish it. So that's a nice flat edge across there, okay? Now with that standing like this, I'm going to line up my other spring clamp, and just like I did my corner to corner, open corner joint, I'm going to make sure that I'm fit up nice and square. And I can stand it up, I can tack it laying down, pretty much any which way I want. I feel like that's pretty good. We'll tack it together. Once I tack one of those sides, technically I could take the spring clamp. Now you gotta be careful that you don't weld it together. Obviously that didn't turn out so good. We're gonna just massage this back into place. It may break, it may not break, but the important thing is that's no longer 90. We wanna open that back up to 90. You can take a look and make sure that your corners are equal. We will tack this other side together. Cover. So this may or may not be 90 degrees right now, and that's all right, but hopefully these pieces are still square, and as we tack this next one in here to make it 3 sides, we will see how close to 90 degrees it is. This can get a little tricky. Now that we've done the angle iron, I can still put the angle iron on here. And now I have a little bit of a shelf to tack this together on. All right, now I'm gonna make sure that this edge, I'm gonna tack this side first. And I'm gonna make sure it's nice and square all the way down. Also making sure that I'm not too far this way or that way. Both those need to line up corner to corner, but I'm really making sure that this first side is lined up good. And once it's where I want it, I'll tack it together. Now that I've got that side done, I'm gonna just take care and massage this line. It looks pretty good. So far I had my first tack's a little hot and heavy. Maybe not the greatest, but my second tack's much smaller, much more concise. Now we're gonna focus on those ones. I'll tack outside here since that's not really going anywhere. I'm gonna tack these corners. Now do you see how I didn't tack on the exact end either? That's still gonna allow me to have some room to put up on my other side. I could go about it the same way at this point, putting a piece of angle iron in on each side and putting in the last 2 sides, the final side being the hardest. I do find it a little bit easier to have 2 pieces to hold on to on your last one versus just trying to float 1 piece on top. But now I'm going to show you how we use a piece of square tubing. We have squares in the shop that will help out with this. As you do the open corner joint, you will kind of figure this out a little bit and knowing how to tack these together. The main thing is these have to be 90 degrees to each other in order for everything to fit together. So now that I got this fit up, I'm gonna go ahead and tack it again. So there we go, that's nice and good. Whether you're using a piece of angle iron or a piece of square tubing, the main thing here is that we need a little bit of a shelf. So I'll go back to my piece of angle iron. Just gonna make sure we're nice and level across. And I'm gonna set this guy right where I want him. If I notice it's maybe not fitting up, again, I can try twisting it just a little bit and seeing how it fits flush, maybe more with another side. Again, we don't want too big of a gap to fill. If possible, they're going to fill corner to corner perfectly. Just like that. Number one rule, don't do any full welds until it's all tacked together. We got 4 sides together. Now it's time for the final 2. When we're doing this one, you grab your piece of angle iron and you're gonna sit this up on a little bit of a shelf. The angle iron is the same thickness as your plate, and it allows you to kind of keep that edge up. And right now, we just kind of want to make sure it's staying put. So even one tack will help us keep this together. This is tricky. Take the time to make sure it's fit up right. Now that I've got that corner fit up the way I want it, I'm going to put a tack on that corner right here. We were able to get that tack together. And you know what? It didn't turn out so bad. You'll notice I don't have tacks right here just yet. I'm going to want to put those there. As I start to weld, the heat will cause it to expand and contract and can suck those 2 corners in, making it not square. So I am going to put 4 more tacks in. You'll notice that I am using the 16th filler rod to tack. It is easier. All right, there we have it, all fit up. And you can see those type of corners. I'm not trying to get a large gap. I'm not trying to fit it on top or overhanging. I want them to meet corner to corner, and so I have that open corner joint. Welding it is a little bit more of a challenge. I am going to have a few of these little things floating around too, where I'm going to tack some angle iron scraps together that will allow you to cradle this together. The main thing is that we want to make sure that we can keep this nice and steady, and it will be different. Our other open corner joint, it might have been maybe that high off the table, essentially about 5 or so inches off the table. When we start to weld it, getting another piece of scrap to hold your torch on to elevate your wrist will help. Now, this is the fun part. Just to do a bunch of welds, and then we can sand it and polish it, do whatever we want. I have one in the classroom that I can show you as well in person. But we're gonna go ahead and weld this out. One of the things to remember while you're welding this, again, because of the heat, you wanna try and bounce your heat around. So I usually weld opposite sides of each other. Instead of trying to weld everything in one area, I will flip it around and weld the other side.
Extinguish my conscience. Lead me to rest.
One of the things to be mindful of as you're filling these up is if you're going to leave the welds as is, or if you want to try and grind or polish or sand them after you're done. And depending on the type of finish you want, if you're going to try and make these corners come to a point, you're going to need to add a lot more filler. If you want to put a chamfer on them or a little flat spot down each corner, then filling it up according to our welding assignment, the open corner joint, will be okay. This is also fun if you can find some pieces of copper. Maybe you have some copper cabling that you had lying around from a construction project. You can take and fill that in and make almost a brazed in or a dissimilar metal in these joints. It may not weld as strong, but it'll look pretty cool if you were to grind or sand it down. Now as I start, I've got 4 sides done. I'm going to start on the crater or the start of another weld, and I'm just going to keep welding it in, flipping to the opposite side, do those 4 sides, and then I'll rotate it one more and do those 4 sides. Again, these corners, depending on how I'm going to finish them, I might need to add a little bit more filler on them and actually make them bigger than maybe I would if they were just a normal weld. One of these things to be aware of is always keeping a nice sharp tungsten. Anytime you goober it, make sure you take the time to sharpen and make sure it's good. Also, this is going to get really hot. Hopefully that makes sense. As you can see, all the smoke just from my glove. Now, when you go to quench this in the quench tank, you can quench it whenever you want. Just know that there may be water inside, and as you start to weld, it'll start to boil and steam out. Not that that's a real big problem until the very last weld. As you're trying to seal this thing up, that last little spot, you might have to give it a second and then come back and get it when it's nice and cool.
So the devil, or is it all in my head?
This is also where you're going to notice if you didn't clean it very well. As you weld this up, you're going to notice little bubbles pouring out of your weld from the plasma cut. There's really nothing you can do about it except grabbing a cutting disc and try and clean it out a little bit more and then welding over it. Things are starting to get really hot right here. I kind of wish I had a quench tank at the house, but I don't. Onward. You'll notice that I left that hole right there. That's basically my vent hole. This thing is so hot right now, especially on aluminum. If I were to try and do a cube out of aluminum, when I seal that up, it would just blow right back out. I've got to let this thing cool down a little bit and then try and fill it really fast to seal it up. All right, so I took a little bit of a brush to it. Definitely not perfect, but that's all right. It's a fun little project. Now, I can keep this as is. I can try doing different finishing techniques on these flat surfaces. I can try and maybe make it a dice, which is always really fun. Opposite sides equals 7. And I could just weld 6 little pips on this side, 1 on that side, and then 3 and 4, 5 and 2. And I could make my own little metal dice that way. I could weld my initials on it. I could do something fun or cute like that. And again, this is just our intro to welding fabrication, kind of how we fit things up, how we assemble it. It's a lot of fun, definitely challenging. Please don't overestimate this project and what it will challenge you. I promise you, if you take the time to fit this up properly, prepare yourself that when you weld it, it won't be as bad. Now, again, we're going to try and do our best on our welding assignments and get really good at watching the arc and watching the puddle. That way, when we get to something like this, all it is after assembly is just doing a whole bunch of welds. All right, good luck on your project.